Good afternoon, everyone. The Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Superfund Waste Management and Regulatory Oversight is meeting today to conduct a hearing on American small businesses' perspectives on Environmental Protection Agency regulatory actions. The purpose of the hearing is to further this subcommittee's oversight of EPA's rulemaking process. We have already held hearings examining the science advisory process underpinning EPA's regulatory action, the sue and settle agreements that result in new EPA regulations, and the EPA's approach to economic analysis used to justify regulations. American small businesses provide jobs, products, and services for millions of Americans. We must recognize the unique characteristics and challenges faced by this vital segment of the U.S. economy so that businesses are able to thrive and grow, rather than be burdened by complex, overreaching EPA regulations that run contrary to the original intent of Congress. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being with us here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. We'll now hear from our next witness, Mr. Frank Knapp, Jr. Mr. Knapp, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Rounds, Ranking Member Markey, and Chairman Inhofe. My name is Frank Knapp. I'm the president of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce, also the board co-chair of the American Sustainable Business Council with a network representing 200,000 businesses. Today's hearing topic is important for small business and the vitality of our economy. Good regulations tend to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship in addition to limiting or preventing destructive forms of economic activity. Bad regulations, whether because they are not designed properly or simply not needed, will be a burden on small businesses and thus harm our economy. Everyone here would prefer the former and not the latter. However, even good regulations will have some negative impact on certain small businesses. The issue is, does the positive economic, social, environmental, or health outcomes outweigh the negatives? For example, well-constructed regulations that encourage alternative energy to reduce carbon dioxide emissions impede the use of fossil fuels, which reduces capital spending and jobs in the fossil fuel industries. However, alternative energy is much more responsive to technology-driven innovation and dollar for dollar invested. Alternative energy stimulates much more employment than fossil fuels. The issue today is, does the Environmental Protection Agency and the federal government's process of promulgating regulations adequately consider any negative impact on small businesses when developing a final regulation? 12 years ago, we addressed this issue in South Carolina. Back then, my organization worked with our state Chamber of Commerce and our state's NFIB to pass our Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Act, modeled after the federal law. A few years ago, the then chairman of the Regulatory Review Committee told me that in 7 years, his committee had reviewed about 300 proposed regulations and identified only 10 that raised their concern. His committee worked with the state agencies promulgating these new regulations and to satisfactorily amend the regulations to address unnecessary burdens on impacted small businesses. The Regulatory Flexibility Act works in our state because we provide the all-volunteer committee the resources they need to do an effective job on newly proposed regulations. And there is the important point. If you want the regulatory process to be fair to all parties and you set up a mechanism to do that, it has to be adequately resourced. Back on June 27th of 2012, I testified before the U.S. House Small Business Committee on the same subject. Mr. Keith Holman of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was testifying. I referred to Mr. Holman's filed written testimony in my testimony, and here's what I said back then. Quote, Mr. Holman correctly identifies one area where the EPA's compliance with the RFA can be improved: more resources for the rulemaking process. While there are voices we hear in Washington critical of the EPA and calls for cutting back or freezing the regulatory process, the reality is that it can work better for small businesses and the public if the EPA was better funded, end quote. That testimony was almost 4 years ago, yet here we are still talking about the EPA regulations and small businesses, as well as proposals to erode the operational capacity of regulatory agencies instead of providing the proper resources for them to do the job Congress tasked them to do to protect small businesses. This month, ASBC, the American Sustainable Business Council, led a coalition of 25 business organizations, including the South Carolina Small Business Chamber, in filing an amicus brief with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in support of the Clean Power Plan. The brief argues that unrestrained climate change will burden national, state, and local economies with increased costs and business disruptions from droughts, flooding, reduced agricultural productivity, extreme weather, rising seas, and other disturbances. In addition, it points out that the Clean Power Plan will boost economic growth by generating new market-based solutions and new jobs in renewable energy. Small business also supports the intent of the waters of the U.S. Polling commissioned by ASBC found that 92% of small business owners support regulations to protect our water and air, and that 80% supported the waters of the U.S. rule. Small businesses know that the risk of clean water disruptions are very real. In 2013, massive manure spills into clean water sources occurred in Wisconsin, threatening the dairy industry. In 2014, it was the Elk River chemical spill in West Virginia, which cost the state's economy $19 million a day. When clean water resources are shut down, the economic burden falls on small businesses. In conclusion, the regulation promulgating process can produce good rules while protecting small businesses from unnecessary burdens if we provide the resources for agencies to expeditiously carry out the requirements Congress has already put in place. But the federal government's responsibility to impacted small businesses shouldn't stop there. Some small businesses will find compliance with federal regulations difficult. The answer is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and invalidate existing rules. Instead, we believe the solution lies in expanding the capacity of the federal government to provide regulatory compliance assistance to small business. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. I welcome any questions the committee may have.
And Mr. Knapp, you, in your testimony, you're saying that the Clean Water Rule enjoys a lot of bipartisan support, and that you're here representing, I think you said 200,000, 300,000 small businesses?
Yeah, the American Sustainable Business Council.
Yeah, could you talk about why those small businesses support the Clean Water Rule?
Small businesses, small business owners are nothing more than regular folk out there. And who doesn't want clean water? And that's what I have always told everybody. A small business person really is just like your neighbor. They just happen to own a business. And they have the same concerns that everybody else has. So to the degree that, that they feel that clean water is important, and they support a regulation that would, in fact, guarantee that their fresh source of water is going to be protected. So it's not unusual for the results that we get from our polling, because those are the same results you get from polling of the general public.
So can you talk a little bit about this balance between regulation on the one hand and cost to businesses with the clear positive impacts that come about because of the regulations? So that creates sometimes a little bit of a conundrum in seeing the benefits that come, as well as the obvious kind of constraints that a regulation might place upon an existing way of doing business, but yet there are clear positives as well.
Yeah, look, regulations exist and the rules exist because there is some outcome that we're seeking, that government wants to happen. Congress has passed some type of legislation that's going to require the implementation, which requires rules. So will there be impacted businesses that will be negatively impacted by a rule? Yes. But again, it is the overwhelming relationship between the negative response and the positive impact. And we know that regulations and rules will be responded to by the private sector. I mean, that's what the private sector does. They recognize where they can make money, and they go there. And if a rule was established that clearly sets a path for businesses to follow, they will follow it. Does that mean that some businesses are going to be negatively impacted? Yes, it does. But what businesses really want are fair rules. They want those rules to be set and to not be questioned all the time, because that then creates the uncertainty that we heard about here with the waters of the U.S.
Thank you very much. We only have 3 minutes, so I want to give you, Mr. Knapp, and Dr. Reichert a chance to deal with this question of whether or not these environmental regulations, in their own way, create a bubbling, boiling cauldron of competitiveness, trying to create the new ideas that make our country cleaner and safer on the one hand, but also more prosperous with homegrown jobs. And so maybe you, Mr. Knapp, you could talk about the 200,000 companies that you're representing in this sector. And you, Dr. Reichert, maybe you could talk about the Massachusetts challenge, this accelerator going from concept to execution and starting up new companies to solve these problems.
I'm going to let the doctor talk about the specific acceleration of the companies. I want to address some things that, if you don't mind, Senator, some things that were said. The Clean Power Plan is going to be implemented by the states. It's a goal set by the federal government, by the administration, EPA, but it'll be up to each state to decide how they're going to achieve that goal. I don't think that any state is going to then say we're going to shut down electricity to do that. I know in South Carolina we're very fortunate. We have 2 nuclear plants being built that'll take care of 80% of our goal. And a coincidence or not, we're going to be sitting pretty good. But nevertheless, the proof is in the economic data that clearly shows that when you invest in new technology, you grow more jobs. I will note that you proudly said that you have over 100,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts, and congratulations on that. I will tell you that that is actually more jobs than the coal mining industry right now. And so you're going that way and they're going the other way. But on balance, we're producing a healthier and stronger economy with new technology.